At 63, I still sleep with one eye open. My late wife Marcia used to say that about me. She said I was Gavin Pierce, the kind of man who could hear a moth sneeze in the middle of a thunderstorm. She wasn't wrong. I spent 22 years as a shift supervisor at a paper mill. My ears learned how to diagnose sick machinery just by the sound of the engines. In the darkness of Morai, that sharpness never left me. I'm not watching over machines anymore. I'm watching over my family. Thursday night in November in Raleigh was quiet. The old oak sap was tightening in the cold. This neighborhood was decent. The trees were older than the houses. Neighbors recognized each other's cars by the sound of the engine alone. Nothing ever happened here. Except tonight. The phone vibrated at 12:04 a.m. I was fully awake in an instant. A faint blue glow from the screen sliced through the darkness. I looked at the caller ID. Welcome to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a snack, settle in. And remember, the people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing. They just chose wrong. Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You're going to like it here. My chest tightened. A feeling I had not had in years. Dominic was my oldest son. He was disciplined to the point of obsession. He did everything on schedule. He never called me after 9:00 p.m. Since his mother's funeral, he had only called at 7:00 a.m. I picked up before the phone could vibrate a second time. Dom, his voice was flat, not panicked. It sounded like a man who had rehearsed this call many times. Don't say anything, just listen. You have to do exactly what I tell you. Do it right now. I sat up straight. Son, it's the middle of the night. Dad. That single word made me stiffen like a board. I had only heard him use that tone twice before. Once when his mother's cancer had metastasized, and once when he told me he was going to prison for something he didn't do. I'm listening, I whispered. A chill crept up from the soles of my feet. Turn off every light in the house. Don't touch the computer. Don't touch the Wi-Fi router. Go up to the attic right now. Lock the door from the inside. He paused. I could hear him breathing heavily. And Dad, under no circumstances are you to tell Tristan. The room suddenly felt colder. Tristan Hale, my son-in-law, Delilah's husband for 9 years. He was sleeping in the living room just beyond the wall. He said his company was renovating his house, so he needed to stay here for a while. I had believed him. I had cooked beef stew for him. I had poured him a good glass of whiskey. Dominic, my voice trembled. You're scaring me. Good. Be scared. Stay quiet and move. Right now. I didn't ask another question. I moved through the house like a ghost. 12 steps down the hallway. I passed the old photographs. Past Marcia's embroidered frame that read, "Home is where the heart is." The words felt shattered now. I climbed up into the attic. I locked the door behind me. I sat down on an old box filled with my wife's winter clothes and tried to steady my breathing. I didn't know anything yet, but beneath my feet a secret buried 8 years ago was about to be dragged into the light. The attic in my house is an unfinished place. Marcia always wanted to turn it into a cozy reading room. She dreamed of oak bookshelves and a velvet armchair, but that never happened. Now it's just dust insulation panels and stacks of cardboard boxes. Light from the neighbor's porch slips through the 2 round windows just enough for me to see the outline of my own shadow. I sat on the box that held Marcia's winter clothes. The smell of mothballs and cedar filled the air. It reminded me of old winters when life was still simple. But reality dragged me back. My knees started protesting against the cold. I tried to keep my breathing as quiet as possible. Stay with Dad's real-life revenge, because what Dad is about to see next will change the entire truth about this family. I found a crack in the floorboards near the eastern wall. The wood had warped from a leak 2 summers ago. Instinctively, I pressed my eye against it. The living room below came into view through the darkness. Suddenly, the table lamp snapped on. Tristan Hale was standing in the middle of the room. He was wearing only an undershirt and dress pants. He checked his watch with a calmness that was almost unsettling. In my eyes, Tristan had always been the perfect man. He looked like a model stepping straight out of a business magazine, tidy, purposeful, and handsome, in a way that never quite reached his eyes. He worked in private equity. He often talked about capital allocation and asset restructuring. I used to joke that I needed a translator just to have dinner with my son-in-law. Delilah would laugh. Tristan would smile as if he were doing me a favor. If you hate hypocrites, hit the like button right now to support justice for the Pierce family. He walked toward the corner of the room, the spot where I kept my mother-in-law's old cabinet. Tristan moved it aside. He didn't struggle at all. He pushed it like he'd done it dozens of times before. He knew exactly how heavy it was. Under the cabinet was a section of hardwood flooring. It looked identical to the rest of the room. But Tristan crouched down and ran 2 fingers along the baseboard. A panel lifted up cleanly. Beneath it was a safe. My heart pounded so hard, I was afraid he might hear it. I had lived in this house for 26 years. I built 2 of the rooms myself. I knew every creak in the floorboards. I knew every soft spot in the drywall. I knew every light switch that stuck when it rained. But I had no idea that safe existed. When had he put it there? How had he done it right under my nose? I watched Tristan spin the combination. Left, right, then left again. He opened it in less than 20 seconds. From inside, he pulled out a thick bundle of documents bound with a rubber band. He sat down on the edge of the bed and opened it. The light from below let me see the title on the top page. Last Will and Testament. Below it in smaller print, Marcia Elaine Pierce. My hands began to tremble. Marcia had a will. Of course she did. We wrote it together in 2009. We met with a lawyer on Glenwood Avenue. I held her hand when she signed it. A copy was still downstairs in the drawer, inside a blue folder labeled Important, in Marcia's handwriting. The estate had been settled 2 years after she passed. It was divided evenly between Dominic Delilah and me. There was also a small portion left to Sienna Delilah's best friend. Marcia loved Sienna like a niece. That was the only will I knew about. I was there. So what exactly was Tristan Hale holding in his hands? And why was he pulling a document out of a secret safe in my house? At 1217 a.m., I pressed my eye harder against the crack in the floor. The wood dug painfully into my cheekbone. Tristan flipped through the pages calmly and methodically. He pulled out his phone and started taking photos of each one. He looked like a man finishing unfinished business. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the moment this son-in-law finally gets his mask ripped off in the next part. Tristan had been here for 4 days. He waited until he was certain I was deeply asleep. Dominic had warned me, don't tell Tristan. Not, be careful, Dad. Not, something might be wrong. Just don't tell Tristan. My son knew exactly what he was dealing with. He had been preparing for tonight for a very long time. I leaned back against the wall in the darkness and started doing the math. Dominic went to prison 8 years ago. He was charged with federal wire fraud. But where had that evidence really come from? The case had moved forward with absurd speed. Dominic refused a public defender because he knew something about it wasn't right. He served 22 months. When he came out, he was quieter than before. Then he joined the FBI. I used to think Dominic joined the FBI because he wanted to turn pain into purpose. Marcia would have cried with pride if she had lived long enough to see his badge ceremony. But sitting here in the attic, watching Tristan photograph a will that shouldn't exist, I began to understand something else. Maybe Dominic didn't join the FBI for inspiration. Maybe he joined with a very specific intention. My son had spent 8 years hunting the man who was sleeping in my living room. And all that time I had been cooking beef stew for him. The lamp downstairs suddenly clicked off. Tristan was finished. I didn't move for a long time. I sat there among my wife's old clothes. The smell of cedar was still in the air, but the feeling of my entire world had collapsed. One thought kept circling through my mind, sharp as a blade. Tristan Hale was about to have the worst anniversary dinner of his life, and I had no idea just how right I was. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you can follow the breathtaking revenge that will unfold at the restaurant tomorrow morning. Dawn in Morai never arrives with noise. It simply replaces the darkness with a dull gray that settles over the old oak trees. The neighbor's porch light clicks off. The first bird begins to sing as if it has something to prove to the world. I had been sitting in that attic for 4 hours. My knees were reminding me of every painful minute of it. 7 a.m. Friday. I hadn't slept. I hadn't even bothered to move. I just sat there on the box of Marcia's winter clothes, my back against the wall, running the same calculation through my head over and over. I kept hoping the answer would change if I tried it one more time. But it never did. My phone vibrated. One short buzz, a message from Dominic. Still up there, I typed back. Where else would I be? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Come down, Dad. Side door. Don't turn on the lights, he was already here. I figured he must have driven through the night. Dominic's gray Chevy Tahoe was parked 2 houses down from mine. It looked exactly like every other vehicle in the federal government fleet. The engine was off. I slipped out through the side door in my house slippers. I must have looked like a man who had completely lost control of his life. I crossed the lawn in the cold November air and climbed into the passenger seat. Brace yourself, because what Dominic was about to reveal would make you question every person you've ever trusted. My son looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Later I learned that was true. He was 38, but he looked 45. More and more he was beginning to resemble his mother. The same jawline. The same eyes that never wasted time on anything unimportant. He was dressed in dark civilian clothes. No badge, no bureau jacket. Just Dominic. My son sat there with a thick case file resting on his lap, and I looked at him for a long moment. Beef stew, I said. He blinked. What I cooked beef stew for him, Dominic. I let him drink my good whiskey. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, just the memory of one. I know, Dad. You could have called me sooner. I couldn't, he said quietly. I could hear the weight in that voice. The weight of legal rules. The weight of procedure. The weight of 8 years of waiting. Until tonight, everything was circumstantial. I needed him to touch that safe. I needed physical evidence. I turned fully toward him. You knew about the safe. I've known about it for 14 months. The cold outside was nothing compared to the chill forming in my chest. Talk, I ordered. And he did. He talked for 41 minutes, and I didn't interrupt him once. If you know me, you'll understand that's the closest thing Raleigh has ever produced to a miracle. It started the worst way possible, with money. Marcia's estate wasn't enormous. The house, a life insurance policy, a savings account she had quietly built over 30 years by clipping coupons and never paying full price for anything. Altogether a little over $400,000. Not generational wealth, but enough for someone to become greedy. The original will, the one I watched Marcia sign in 2009, split everything evenly. 1/3 for me, 1/3 for Dominic, 1/3 for Delilah. But the will that was actually used when her estate was settled was different. Dominic's share had been reduced to a symbolic amount, $8,000. The rest was folded into Delilah's portion, which meant Tristan's portion. How I managed to say. He had someone on the inside at the law office, Dominic said. A paralegal who was paid to swap the documents before the filing. The original was buried. Tristan kept it in the safe as a kind of insurance policy. Proof that he knew what the real will said if anyone ever challenged it. And leverage over Delilah. I went completely still. Tristan Hale had kept a document that could destroy him just to keep my daughter chained to him. I tucked that thought into a drawer in my mind, labeled, "Things I'll deal with later, so I don't punch through this dashboard right now." "And the wire fraud charge?" I asked. Dominic let out a long breath. "Set up," he said. Tristan had a college friend at a brokerage firm in Charlotte. They created a fake paper trail phantom transactions shell, accounts that pointed straight to me. He tipped off the SEC anonymously. The case moved to the Department of Justice in 6 weeks. He paused. I want you to understand how clean it was. He didn't improvise. He planned this before he proposed to Delilah. That sentence hit like a brick through a window. Before he proposed. Tristan Hale had mapped out the destruction of my son's life as a prerequisite to marrying my daughter. He had sat across from me at the dinner table asking for Delilah's hand while already holding a blueprint to send her brother to prison. If Tristan's manipulation makes your blood boil, the voice in my head almost said, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the moment he finally pays for it. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. After you got out. After you joined the bureau. Dominic looked at me for the first time. Because you would have gone straight to Delilah, he said, and Delilah would have gone straight to Tristan, and Tristan would have run. He paused. Or worse. He was right. I knew myself well enough to admit it. I would never have been able to look that man in the eye without letting my hatred show. He's got leverage, Dad. On the paralegal, the broker, and at least 2 others. If he thought the net was closing too soon, people could have gotten hurt. I needed him comfortable. I needed him walking around here thinking he'd already won. And the safe. We've been running intermittent surveillance on this house for 8 months. We knew he accessed it once last Easter. But we couldn't get inside without a warrant. And we couldn't get a warrant without direct evidence. A faint smile touched his face. So we waited for him to come to it himself. You used my house as bait, I said. I used his greed as bait, Dominic corrected gently. Your house is just where his greed happens to live. I wanted to be angry with him. I tried the feeling on like a coat that didn't quite fit. But underneath the 4 hours in the attic, underneath the beef stew, there was something else rising in my chest. Something close to pride. My son had done this the right way. So what happens now, I asked. Dominic pulled a photograph from the case file and slid it toward me. It was an invitation card, cream paper with gold lettering. I recognized Delilah's handwriting immediately. The 9th wedding anniversary of Tristan and Delilah Hale, Saturday, November 14, 7:00 p.m. Brasserie LaCroix. We'll let him enjoy the appetizers, Dominic said. He picked the card back up with the care of someone handling something almost sacred. And then we finish this. I nodded slowly. I stared out through the windshield. My house, my oak trees, my front porch. 26 years of my life sitting there in the gray light of November. Sienna will be at that dinner, I said. She's already been briefed, Dominic replied, glancing at me. Sienna's known about this for 6 months. She helped us verify the documents. She remembered details from Mom's original will that weren't in the paper records. I thought about Sienna. Sharp, quiet. The kind of woman who remembers everything, but reveals nothing. Marcia had been right about her. Sienna was the most trustworthy person Delilah had ever brought into this house. Go get some sleep, Dad, Dominic said. Tomorrow night is going to be a long one. I stepped out of the SUV and stood on the sidewalk in my house slippers. I looked at him through the window. Dom, your mother. She knew, didn't she? She knew something wasn't right about Tristan. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached forward and shifted the Tahoe into drive. Go to sleep, Dad. He drove away before I could ask again. And maybe that was the answer. I walked back into the house past Marcia's embroidered frame. Home is where the heart is. I stood in the kitchen under the dim light of early morning. Somewhere down the hallway, Tristan Hale was asleep in my living room, dreaming whatever dreams men like him dream. Tomorrow night he would sit down to dinner with his wife, his colleagues, and the pastor who had married them. I would be there too. And this time I wouldn't be cooking beef stew for anyone. The truth is about to be served at the dinner table. Stay with me, hit like, and step into the most dramatic final act of this story. Saturday, November 14. I woke up at 7:00 a.m. and made myself a proper breakfast, eggs over easy toast and strong black coffee. My mother always used to say, never do anything important on an empty stomach. Tristan came downstairs at 8:15 wearing his bathrobe. He looked relaxed, completely unconcerned, and asked if there was any coffee left. I smiled and poured him a cup. Enjoy it while you can, I thought. This is the last cup you'll ever drink as a free man. He sat down at Marcia's dining table, the one she picked out herself from the furniture store on Capitol Boulevard back in 2003. He scrolled through his phone while sipping coffee, carrying the quiet confidence of a man who believed he had already won. And why wouldn't he? For 8 years he had been winning. He sent my son to prison. He stole my wife's inheritance. He ate my food, drank my whiskey, and sat beside my daughter in the church pew every Christmas like he belonged there. Stay with this story until the end, because Tristan's performance is about to be torn apart in the one place he feels safest. Tonight's a big night, he said without looking up from his phone. It sure is, I replied. Delilah's been planning this dinner for months. You'll be there, right? I turned from the sink and looked directly at him. I wanted to see if there was even a flicker of conscience in him. Tristan finally looked up. Something passed across his face. Just a flicker, less than a quarter of a second, like he had heard a sound he couldn't quite identify. Then it vanished. The polished, artificial smile came back. Of course, he said. It's going to be a wonderful evening. If you believe justice may arrive late but never fails to arrive, go ahead and like this video now. Brasserie LaCroix sits on the corner of Fayetteville and Cabarrus in downtown Raleigh. It's the kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't list prices, because if you need to ask, you probably shouldn't be there. Dark wood, flickering candlelight, crisp white tablecloths so stiff they could practically stand on their own. Exactly the kind of place Tristan loved because it came with a built-in upscale audience for his performance. I arrived at 6:45. Dominic had told me to get there early. The dining room was already half full. I spotted the reserved section toward the back. A long table, 8 chairs, flowers in the center, and handwritten name cards at every seat. Delilah had done it all herself. My daughter had spent weeks planning a celebration for a man who had planned the destruction of her family before he ever put a ring on her finger. Sienna arrived at 6:52 wearing a deep, wine-red dress. She carried the face of a woman who had been holding a secret for 6 months and was finally ready to set it down. She sat beside me without a word and squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "Ask me again in an hour," I said. She smiled a brief, sad smile. "Marcia would like this," she said. Marcia, I replied, would have shown up an hour early and already cornered the manager to get the full situation report. The rest of the guests began arriving around 7:05. 2 couples from Tristan's company, pleasant people who had no idea what they'd just walked into tonight. Pastor Gerald Webb, the man who had married Tristan and Delilah 9 years ago. A decent man, so earnest it almost hurt to look at him. And then Delilah walked in. She was wearing a green dress that made her look exactly like her mother. She was laughing at something Tristan had said. She looked happy. That's going to make this complicated, I thought. Very complicated. Tristan ran the table like a politician. Handshakes. Friendly pats on the shoulder. Big, effortless laughter he used like a tool. He filled everyone's wine glasses before the waiter could even reach the table. He was magnetic in the way dangerous things often are like a flame. You lean toward it until it burns you. He sat at the far end of the table. Our eyes met once. He lifted his glass toward me. I raised mine back. "Enjoy the appetizers," I remembered Dominic saying. The starters came and went. Bread salad, easy conversation. The table was warm with wine and candlelight. Pastor Webb was telling the story of their wedding day. "I've officiated more than 400 ceremonies," he said warmly, "but I've never seen a groom as calm and composed as Tristan." Composed, I thought. Of course he was. By then he had already won. My phone vibrated beneath the table. A message from Dominic. 2 minutes. I placed the phone face down. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. Beside me, Sienna had gone completely still. The main course had just arrived. Tristan was halfway through some story about a deal somewhere in the Carolinas, a brag disguised as storytelling. Subscribe now because the doors of Brasserie LaCroix are about to open, and the truth will have nowhere left to hide. The restaurant's front door opened. Dominic Pierce walked in. He was wearing a navy suit, white shirt, no tie. Behind him were 2 people. I didn't recognize a woman in a blazer and a man in a gray jacket. They moved through the restaurant with quiet authority and absolutely no intention of making anyone comfortable. The room didn't go silent all at once. It happened gradually. A table near the door fell quiet first. Then the next. The couple from Tristan's company looked up, their expressions shifting into confusion. Tristan was sitting with his back to the entrance. Delilah saw Dominic first. Her face lit up instantly. "Dom, oh my God, you came. I didn't know you were." Then she noticed the 2 strangers walking behind him. Her voice faded and stopped. Dominic walked straight through the dining room, not looking at anyone except Tristan. Tristan turned around slowly. This time he recognized the sound, the one he couldn't identify that morning. The composed man, the calm groom from 9 years ago, looked at my son. And for one single moment, a pure, priceless moment, I watched the confidence he had spent 9 years building disappear completely from his face. "There you are," I thought. "That's the real you." Dominic stopped at the head of the table. He looked down at Tristan Hale with the patience of a man who had waited 8 years for this moment, and now felt no need to rush it. "Tristan Allen Hale," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and falsification of legal documents. You have the right to remain silent." The entire table froze. "What is this?" Tristan said, struggling to regain his composure. "What are you doing? This is a private dinner. It's my anniversary. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Dominic tilted his head slightly. I have the original will, Tristan. I have the contents of your safe, the photos you took Thursday night, the testimony of the paralegal at the Ketterman office, and 8 years of financial records linking you to the shell accounts used to frame me. Tristan opened his mouth. No sound came out. The woman in the blazer stepped forward with the handcuffs. Tristan Hale stood up from the anniversary table his wife had spent weeks planning. He looked across the table straight at me. Only me. As if in that moment he had finally understood something. I looked back at him. I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. I simply held his gaze and let him read whatever he needed to read in it. You sat at my table. You drank my whiskey. You ate my beef stew. You slept in my house. And you locked my son in a cage. Every time you looked me in the eye, you thought I was the dumbest man in the room. But you were wrong. I wasn't the fool here. The handcuffs clicked. Pastor Webb let out a sound of quiet anguish. Delilah didn't move. She sat there in her green dress, both hands resting flat on the tablecloth. Her face carried an expression I didn't have a name for, and didn't want to look at for too long. That was the hard part I had expected. As Tristan was led away, the restaurant remained silent for a long moment. Then a fork tapped against a plate somewhere, and the world slowly remembered how to move again. Dominic turned back to the table and sat down in Tristan's chair at the head. He looked at Delilah. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm truly sorry I couldn't tell you." Delilah looked up. Her eyes were dry. That surprised me. But then I remembered she was Marcia's daughter. How long, she asked. 8 years to build the case, Dominic said. 6 months to gather enough evidence. The will, Delilah said flatly. Mom's real will. Yes. Everything will go back to the way Mom intended. Split evenly. For all of us. Delilah glanced toward Sienna. A silent conversation passed between them, the kind only two women who had been best friends since they were 19 could have without a single word. Then Delilah looked at me. "Dad," she said, and her voice broke on that single word. I stood up, walked over, and wrapped my arms around her, just like I had when she was 7 years old and terrified of thunder. She held on to me with both arms. "I'm here," I whispered. "I've always been here." She cried once, short and quiet. Then she sat up straight, wiped her face with the white linen napkin, and looked down at the untouched main course in front of her. "Is the food good here, Dad?" she asked. I blinked. "What?" "The food," she said. "I picked this restaurant, but I've never actually eaten here, and right now, I want to eat something." I sat down. I looked at my son. I looked at Sienna. I looked at Pastor Webb. "Yes," I said quietly. "And we will." 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, I walked downstairs and made coffee. I stood by the kitchen window looking out at the oak trees in the yard. November's cold had turned into December's cold. The trees were bare. The neighborhood was still quiet in that familiar Morai way. On the kitchen counter sat a blue file folder. Marcia's handwriting was on the label, "Important." I had taken it out of the filing cabinet the night before. Inside was the original will, not a photograph. Not a copy. The original recovered, certified, and properly filed with the court. Marcia's real words. Marcia's real wishes. The version where my son hadn't been erased. The version where no one could rewrite her choices when she was too weak to defend them. I placed my hand on the folder. "We got him, Marcia," I said to the quiet kitchen. To the embroidered frame on the wall. To the woman who could hear a moth sneeze and loved all of us far more than we deserved. Took a while, but we got him. The coffee finished brewing. Outside, the first bird of the morning began to sing like it had something to prove. I poured myself a cup, and for the first time in 8 years it tasted exactly the way it was supposed to. If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, do us a small favor, subscribe. Many people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing and means a lot to us. The aftermath of an explosion never ends when the sound fades. It lingers in the debris you have to pick through for months, sometimes years afterward. After the dinner at Brasserie La Croix, my house in Morai didn't feel the same anymore. The ghosts of deception seemed to linger in the corners, even though the man responsible was already behind bars. Stay with Dad's real-life revenge, because this final chapter will show you what justice really looks like when the last masks fall away. 2 weeks after the arrest, Delilah moved back into my house. She didn't cry much, or at least not in front of me. Instead, she was frighteningly quiet, the same way Dominic had been when he first came home from Butner. She spent hours sitting in the living room staring at the furniture Tristan had once touched. I knew what she was asking herself. How much of those 9 years had been real? Had he ever loved her, even for a second? Or had every smile simply been part of a balance sheet? One afternoon I found her standing over the spot where the hidden safe had been sealed by the FBI. The floorboard was still lifted, revealing a black hollow beneath it, like an open wound in the body of the house. "Dad," she said hoarsely, "he sat right here. He played with your grandchildren." While knowing my brother was in prison because of him, I placed my hand on her shoulder. "The weight of the truth is something no medicine can soften. He's a predator, Delilah," I told her gently. "Predators don't feel anything for their prey. If you believe Delilah deserves a strong new beginning, go ahead and hit the like button to send her some strength." Dominic came by later that evening. He wasn't wearing the Navy FBI suit anymore. Instead, he had on the old jacket Marcia bought him before everything went wrong. He looked lighter somehow, though his eyes still carried the exhaustion of an 8-year hunt. We sat out on the porch together, watching the last oak leaves fall. The paralegal confessed to everything Dad, Dominic said, taking a sip of coffee. Tristan paid him a total of $50, 000 over 8 years to keep quiet. He even had a list of future targets. Tristan didn't just want our family's money. He wanted to build an empire on other people's suffering. I looked at my son, the son who had been robbed of his youth, his reputation, and his peace. "You did well, Dom. Your mother, she would have been proud." Dominic stayed silent for a long moment. He stared into the darkness of the garden. "You know, when I was in prison," he said slowly, "I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let him win. If I died in there, he won. If I got out and turned into a drunk, he won. The only way to win was to put him in the same cage he pushed me into." Don't forget to subscribe now to support quiet heroes like Dominic in the fight for justice. Because justice isn't just the sound of handcuffs. Justice is giving back what was stolen. 3 weeks later, the new law office called. Marcia's original will had been fully restored in court. The inheritance stolen from Dominic had been recovered from Tristan's offshore accounts. And most importantly, my son's name had been completely cleared. One December morning I stood in the kitchen with the real will in my hands. Marcia's handwriting was there on the page. I could almost smell her lavender perfume on the paper. "It's done, Marcia," I whispered. Later that day, I went up to the attic again. This time I wasn't hiding. I opened the round windows wide. Pale winter sunlight spilled inside, lighting up the dust dancing in the air. I began clearing the space. Old boxes, leftover insulation, things we no longer needed. I was finally going to turn the attic into the reading room Marcia had always dreamed about. Sienna came over that weekend to help us. She brought trays of cookies and the calm strength a family needs after a storm. "Mr. Gavin," Sienna said while we were placing Marcia's old books on the shelves, "do you know why I helped Dominic?" I shook my head. "Because Marcia once told me," Sienna said. "Sienna, if one day I'm not here anymore, watch over the kids. Sometimes the truth needs someone outside the family to see it clearly." She gave a sad smile. I started noticing Tristan sneaking around with phone calls by their 3rd year of marriage. I just didn't have proof until Dominic contacted me. It turned out Marcia had seen through everything from the very beginning. She couldn't stop Tristan back then, but she chose the right person to trust. That night my family gathered around the dining table. Dominic, Delilah, the grandchildren. No beef stew. We ordered pizza and laughed about old memories from when Marcia was still alive. For the first time in nearly a decade, the air in that house no longer felt suffocating. Tristan Hale was now sitting in a federal jail waiting for trial. He wasn't the calmest groom anyone had ever seen anymore. His lawyers were trying to negotiate, but Dominic had made sure every loophole was sealed. Tristan would spend far more time in prison than Dominic ever had. When the grandchildren had fallen asleep and Dominic walked Delilah upstairs, I stayed behind in the living room alone. I looked at the section of floor where the hidden safe had once been. It was gone. All that remained was polished oak wood reflecting the warm light in the room. I poured myself one last glass of bourbon for the night and raised it toward Marcia's photograph on the mantel. "Congratulations, Marcia," I said softly. "We brought the truth home." The wind chimes on the porch rang gently in the cold air. I took a deep breath. My chest didn't feel tight anymore. The instincts of a factory supervisor were still there, but from tonight on I could finally sleep with both eyes closed. Because under this roof there were no secrets left. If you've listened this far, and want stories like this to keep coming, it would truly help if you hit the like button and subscribe. About 97% of viewers never do, but it's what keeps this entire channel going. At 63, and for the first time in 8 years, I woke up without feeling a stone pressing down on my chest. This morning the sky over Raleigh wasn't the dull gray of hidden schemes anymore. It was a clear, sharp blue, cold but refreshing. I stood in the kitchen, watching the water run from the faucet, and realized something. I didn't need to listen for a moth sneezing anymore. The predator was in a cage. Now it was time for the survivors to begin healing. Stay with Dad's real-life revenge until the very last moments, because this final chapter isn't just about punishment, it's about taking back what was always ours. Delilah came downstairs after the sun had fully risen. She was wearing one of her mother's old sweaters and holding a small notebook. It was a list of everything she planned to do to erase Tristan from her life. Divorce filing, change the locks, restore her name to Delilah Pierce. She looked at me. The shock that had been in her eyes the night of the dinner at Brasserie La Croix had softened. "Dad," she said, her voice gentle, but steady, "I'm going to sell the apartment in Charlotte. I want to use the money to start a scholarship fund in Mom's name for law students who want to fight financial fraud." I looked at my daughter and saw Marcia in her. Not the fragile woman from the final days, but the stubborn, righteous woman who spent 30 years clipping coupons so her children could have a future. If you believe Delilah is a strong woman, hit the like button to support her new beginning. Dominic stopped by with one last stack of documents. He wasn't an FBI agent on duty today. He was just the eldest son coming home for breakfast. He set the newspaper on the table. On the front page was a small headline about an arrest for federal fraud. Tristan's name wasn't printed, only initials, but we knew. Tristan's entire world had shrunk to a single barred window. "He tried calling me from the detention center," Dominic said, tearing off a piece of bread. "He wanted to negotiate. Said he still had evidence that could help my career." "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "I didn't answer him, Dad," Dominic said. "I just hung up. Some people believe everything in this world can be negotiated. He still doesn't understand that some things, like the honor of the Pierce family, are priceless." If you've stayed with this story, subscribe now and stand with the Pierce family as we close this dark chapter and open the door to justice. That afternoon we all went up to the attic together. Not to hide this time, but to finish Marcia's dream. Sienna came too, bringing the cream-colored curtains Marcia had always loved. We dusted the rafters, stacked the cardboard boxes neatly, and cleared the last corners of the room. When I lifted the final box labeled Marcia's winter clothes, a small piece of paper slipped out. It was an old yellow sticky note, edges worn soft with time. Marcia's familiar handwriting was scrawled across it. "Gavin, if you're reading this, it means the attic is finally clean. Don't forget to water the oak trees. I love you." I stood there in the middle of that sunlit room, completely still. Marcia had always known. She knew I would finish this one day. She knew justice would eventually find its way home, no matter how long it took. The debt of 8 years had finally been paid. Not with blood, with truth. Tristan Hale lost because he underestimated 2 things: the patience of a father and the love of a wounded family. He thought we were pawns on his chessboard, but he forgot something. Sometimes it's the pawns that bring down the king. I stepped onto the attic balcony and looked down at the quiet Morai Street. The old oak trees were still standing there, just as they always had, witnesses to everything. They had seen betrayal, and now they were seeing renewal. If you'd like to hear more real, raw, family-centered stories like this, join our community by hitting like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. I poured myself a cup of hot coffee. Steam curled upward in the afternoon sunlight. I took a deep breath. The world kept turning. The bird on the oak branch kept singing. But from now on, every morning in Morai would carry the taste of freedom. "We did it, Marcia," I whispered into the quiet air. And somehow I knew she was smiling.